Hey guys, another episode of Agency Exposed. What's going on?
Here we are.
It's hot. It's summertime.
Man, it's hot. This weekend was hot.
Hot?
Yeah, I went for a motorcycle ride with a bunch of friends of mine, and by like 9 a.m. it was like 90.
I felt like I was walking through soup this morning.
There was a lot of fog out today.
Yeah.
My glasses always fog up when I go from my air-conditioned car and I open the door. I can't see, plus I have a mask on. And it's really awkward when you go into a store because you go from your car, you're fogged up, you can't breathe because fog's coming up from your mask too, is the glasses.
I haven't learned how to defog my glasses when I wear a mask. Is there a trick to that?
Yeah, don't wear a mask.
Breathe in through my nose and then blow out like this.
Oh,
Blow
really?
down.
Oh, man.
Like a scuba diver or something.
Oh, the life and times of the new reality. How are you guys doing with everything?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Pretty good. It's Monday. It's a Monday.
We don't normally record on a Monday.
No, we don't.
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit different today.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about profitability the last episode. This is part 2. We felt like, given the situation of some of the things we were talking about, I think it's really important that we continue this conversation because as an agency owner, as a contractor, as a solopreneur, it's really important to know, am I making money? I've been in an agency world, both working for people and own my own agency. You get these big contracts and all this money you think you're going to make and get all these people working, and then you realize, hey, what happened to all that money? Where did it go?
It's so easy for expenses to get out of control and away from you in service business and agency world, it seems like, because your costs are human resources, right? And so I find it so hard. Our journey to tracking that stuff was so long and painful because it just not easy to do. You have to, it's part tools, part training of people, part mentality.
Yeah.
And we should probably say right off, it gets harder the more people that you add, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've done everything, and to the point where I've given up on things I probably shouldn't have, just because I feel like when you're dealing with humans and human resources, it's different than counting widgets. Where it's easy to count widgets. It's harder to count employee hours and to really understand where the time is going. And so it's I'd love to unpack that today. And
well, the goal here, right, is like last time we talked about a little bit of the model differences, and I mentioned that I tend to see this, agencies tend to have $100,000 per revenue per head or whatever your revenue per head is, but like, how do you grow that, whatever that is? And I think maybe some of that is we can unpack some of the ways that we've tried to increase profitability to get it to a healthy place, right?
yeah.
Because if you don't have that, ultimately your business, it dies a slow death. I don't know if maybe it continues on, but it's very hard. You don't realize what's happening until you just can't do things. You can't innovate. You can't invest into things.
One of the challenges that I always have is that it seems like our estimates are based on man hours or man or woman hours. Hours of employee time. However, it is so difficult to measure our employees' time toward a project. So it's really difficult. And I've done different things in my career, and I've used different software for tracking time, and I've used different approaches to it, and I've never found anything that really works well. And I'd be curious to hear about your thoughts to see if there's something that you've done that you've been able to been able to crack the code.
Man, I think that the idea of every single person tracking every minute of every day that they work is probably an illusion. I don't think you can get there accurately. And so
does it get harder or easier? Or maybe I should ask it like this. Brad, maybe you can help with this question. Does it become more necessary with the size of your team? It's like if you're a solopreneur, yeah, that's one thing. If you're a team of, say, 6 or 7, yes, that's one thing. But if you're a team of 30, 40, 50, 100 people, is it become harder or does it become more necessary to be more accurate?
I think it becomes more necessary to be more accurate. I think it's more challenging as you get larger. I think the challenge that I have is that as you get larger, you have employees who will work their tail off. Every minute they're doing something that is valuable to the company. And then we all know you'll have employees who start to, because they're not being audited, or if they're not audited, they start laxing up, right? And they're starting to take longer lunches. They're starting to go and take longer stuff. And you really don't know if they're really all that profitable. Like, you're trying to understand, is this employee, are they taking advantage of it? And I've been in business enough to know that there's half of the employees who will work hard for you, and there's another half that will start to get, the honeymoon's over, will start to get lax, and they'll start to take advantage of time. And there's nothing wrong with relaxed time and to have an open environment where people feel like they're not always stressed. We don't want to stress out employees. At the same time, there are some people that will take advantage of that, and then what happens is that your estimates are off because they're not putting the time in. Even though they're there full time, they may seem like they're working, right? But they're not really working efficiently. And how do you track that? How do you know if your employees are working efficiently? Especially as you get larger, it's harder.
Brad, you've been in the traditional agency world for a long time. So how did it used to be? Give us a little bit of history.
It's funny because, we used to do timesheets and all of that stuff. And then we went online back in the early 2000s or early 1990s. There was a software in the agency world for smaller agencies called Profits and Clients. I don't even know if they're still around. You can probably Google them, Profits and Clients. And everything was put on like a server. So you could access the time, and all the time would go into, and it's part of an accounting package for agencies. And that was kind of like a tier 1 package at the time. And I remember really getting folks over to this other type of, from paper to more of an online tracking, and employees fought that. Like, they did not want that accountability. And you had to ask yourself, why? Was it just because they weren't doing as much time as what they say they were doing? And it tracked. It literally, you had to click a button and it would track you when you're done.
Oh, it was only real time. You couldn't edit it or anything.
I can't remember. It was so long ago. But I remember the pushback that we had on that. And it's funny because most employees don't really think much about your business. And that's always a challenge for all business owners, right? They're there to do a job. They want to do a good job, but they also want flexibility and freedom. So it was challenging to get us on that platform. And then what we found out was that we actually weren't billing as much as we thought we were. So at that point, you can't charge a client when you're not billing them. So we found out we weren't actually billing as much as we thought we were.
So the original timesheets were more.
Yeah, and it changed some of our projections just of how much time an employee should actually be billable and how much can they be billable, And so I have my own model right now that I use. We track time. We have basically, and how we do it is we don't do minute by minute. What we do is we actually do per project, and then we have one of our project managers that will actually keep track of the time, and we divide the time. Most of our estimates are based, and the projects we do are based on preset a budget. So we go over in time. That's our fault. We pay for that. So for us to make profit, we have to stay within the boundaries in the lane. And what I found is when estimating is almost as important as keeping track of the hours. Actually, it's more important to be able to estimate projects, be able to allow enough padding so that you can spend a little extra time and your team can spend extra time when it's necessary. Always knowing that you're probably 90% of the time going to go over budget versus under budget. It's hard to go under budget. It's easy to go over budget. Do
you have any formulas on that? I know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have some form. You're talking about estimating?
Yeah, do you always add on 25% of whatever you think it's going to be, or 50%? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, not 50%, but at times 10 to 30.
When you build websites, you better add 50%.
Yeah, 10 to 30%. definitely 10 to 30% of what we believe. And I also do this thing where I do a top-down and a bottom-up estimate. So we'll look at like a project and we'll break it down into all the resources it's going to take and all the hours from each resource it's going to take, all of our expenses and then I'll look at it from a bottom up, saying, okay, if this is man-month hours, let's say we're working on a project for 3 months, and how many people am I having on the account, and how much of their time is going to be spent? So if I say, hey, Bob, you're going to be working on this, and your time is going to be 50%, well, I need to make sure that those numbers add up to the same amount of numbers that I've estimated for the amount of hours I'm giving you. And if they don't, then there's something wrong there. Then we're going to lose money. So I do different ways that I audit my edits or my estimates, and my team does too. They kind of learned to do that, and we've been doing a pretty good job the last year. But it also takes somebody who has a really good knowledge of the project and has done many projects in the past that are similar to really understand the nuance and where you can get off. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is not estimating, but it's really scope creep. It's allowing the client to have flexibility, but at the same time making sure that projects don't go too long. There's things that are not thrown in there that weren't originally part of the scope. Those kind of things are where we really get ourselves into trouble.
Yeah. Do you guys use any specific software for your teams, employees, contractors that you bring in that you can at least try to get an idea of where the time spent? Because, I think there's many factors to this that we can unpack today. One of them that as I'm sitting here listening to you guys is that it's not, yes, there's always going to be those team members or staff that the honeymoon's over and they may not be excited about working things and they might blow off time or take longer lunches. But then there's the opposite problem where you have team members that love to work and put in a lot of hours, but they end up allocating the wrong time to the wrong projects, and they find they spend a whole day with one client, which getting them where they need to be, but they don't need to be spending that much time with that client. They're possibly neglecting other clients, or they're over budget on one client. So is software something that you guys use to kind of monitor and see so you can catch that? So because obviously you can't look over people's shoulder and see what they're doing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know, Brad, I have some questions for you, but the answer to that, I think, absolutely, for us, we do. And I find it's a balance between trying to get accurate knowledge about where time is spent so that you know your costs, so that you know how much you've used of the estimate or budget or whatever you have. And then there's also the other side, which is the more overbearing and hard to use things are, the less people will use them or want to use them, which ultimately means that, look, if all it is willpower that pushes people through using a piece of software, it's never going to be something that can continue long term. Either they'll burn out or they're going to start to just guess at numbers to make it easier. And I find that in the agency world, there is a lot of time tracking. Some people track every minute on time cards. And I know there's a lot of anxiety from people that work inside of that environment around filling those out. Especially, I know a couple agencies here in town. They even fill them out like at the end of every week or month, which, let's be honest, like how accurate could that possibly be, right? Even for the person who even keeps a great log of their own time. But all that to say is, I think there's a balance where you have to pick that middle ground that gets you the idea as accurate as possible of profitability or how much budget you've used, and is also inside of a workflow. And we can unpack that, but that is where we've done the most growth and work over the years, is figuring out what the workflow is, what's the right piece of software, and what's the right depth to go inside of that. Because ultimately, if it's not easy, if it can't be something that someone doesn't think about, it's going to be really hard for them to do it, and it's going to be hard for it to be accurate.
Yeah. What I found, if they're not tracking their hours real time, right, when they're doing the project, there's no way they can be accurate if they wait till the end of the week to do time cards.
Right.
And I've saw that before in my past, and so it's like it's.
That's why I was bringing up the past, because how accurate was that back then? I mean,
well, you really need to do it real time, and
Yeah.
so, and again, never wait till like the end of the week. You got to submit like what you did and what you worked on. I'm like, that's not accurate. And the challenge is that is keeping that data. You see all these new tools now for time tracking, where you have like these cubes that you put on your desk. You see these where you like rotate them, like almost like a cube, and you can write down the client on like a Sharpie or some type of pen that you can erase, so you can put different clients on different sides, and all you do is flip it to the side up that your client that you're working on, and it actually ties into your computer and actually starts the time clock as soon as you turn it. So like, let's say you're an employee and you work on 3 or 4 different clients throughout the day, you can literally do that every time you move on to a new project. You just flip the cube. So there's all these ways that, with technology that we haven't tried any of those. I thought those are kind of interesting, but I also see there's a little bit of a risk there. What we do is we do audits from time to time. So we will actually have our employees track their time throughout the day for like a week, just to kind of see kind of what how they're doing and what they put in their time. Not that we really hold to it or anything. It's really just more of an audit. And we're still figuring this out. Right now, we're at the size where I feel like we don't to track our every minute. I don't know if it really is all that helpful for us right now. I don't know if we would actually use it, but as we grow and as we get bigger, we need to make sure that we have some things in place, because it has to be a process.
It also depends on your model, right? So if you do billing of actual time to a client, like in after the fact, then that may, that kind of model needs obviously clear time tracking and also notes on those kind of things. We try not to do that. We've talked about this before. Like, in my opinion, billing that way is the worst of both worlds for both sides, right? Like, you don't know as an agency you can't project what your income's gonna be, and as a client you can't project what your bill's gonna be, and so it just creates a hard expectation to manage.
Yeah.
So we don't do really any of that, but we do, Brad, to your point, we do estimate things, and we've tried to productize all of our offerings so that, like, they're not the exact same deliverable that we're creating, but they are the same building blocks, so that there's a process around it, and they can be efficient, and we can continually be better at producing them and more efficient at producing those things, like over time as we increase, as we innovate on our products. And so to that end, that repetition, I think anytime you do things over and over again, that's going to be easier for you to estimate how much time, get better at it, find, ways to improve that. But we do estimate how much time something's going to take. And so then, it's important that we do track that. And while, if one of the requirements that I was trying to get to a couple years ago was, the challenge was I couldn't find the right piece of software that would make this easy, and I think easy is important. Right now we use a piece of software called EverHour, and we attach that. We use Basecamp 3 as our sort of project management tool. It's like simple enough, and it's also just complicated just enough. I find like the more complex those tools are, sometimes the harder they are to use. But for what it's worth, that's what we use, and the two integrate with each other. But I think the reason I mention that is it has to be part of a workflow for it to work. So like we have these sort of like mantras in our office that help people remember how workflows go, and then hopefully make their lives easier and make it easier to track. But one of them is like, you shouldn't be doing anything for a client unless you have found the task for it in Basecamp, and if you found that, then you just hit the timer and you turn on time. You can write your notes in there and log it, and then be done. the more and more people have adopted that, it's been easier. Like real time is important. I don't think we used to like track things after, week after or something like that. I found that it wasn't, not only was it not really accurate, but here's the deal. The benefit of a lot of the real time stuff is that you can know where you're at and resource usage real time, which is super important if you know, hey, if you know you have 10 hours to do something, knowing that you went 15 hours 2 weeks later is not helpful at all.
Yeah.
What you need to know is, we're at 8 hours right now. And I think that's what you really need to get to, but it has to be easy for people to do it.
Yeah.
And another thing in all of this, and we can talk more about software, is it's important to set, for those of us in the agency world who are, our product is our service many times, and it is our man hours, is to have those open dialogues with clients. I think is so important, because I've seen it work both ways, and I've seen it succeed and fail both ways. But I think where I've seen it work more efficiently is when the client is very clear on what the hours are and what they're paying for, and there is a project management software system in place so that when you're getting close, you're at 8 hours. You tell the client, hey, we're at 8 hours. We have budgeted and you have paid for agreed to 10. Would you like us to go over? Because here's how we've used those 8 hours. And so that there's this clear, I think that's what's important, because shouldering it all on the business owner or the manager is one thing, but sharing that and saying, do we need to be allocating our hours differently? Are you happy with these 8 hours so far, these 10 hours? And are you willing to pay for more because it's going to take more? And that way the client, I think, can be responsible. And it goes back to this relationship thing that we've talked about. It's the client's demanding, and you're going over what you've estimated and said, well, we're at fault for estimating it wrong. Maybe that's not always the best way.
No, I don't. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that there are going to be times when you do things that there's an unknown factor to it, right? And I do think it's up to you, but like if the intent is that it's a shared endeavor, then communicating that is important, right? Like you should. I don't think as an agency you should just adopt all the risk attached to an unknown. Yeah. But you do have to communicate it, and I do think that's important.
One of the areas that I found that we've probably lost most of our money as far as profit is trying to get a scope of work for something we don't really have a strong idea of what it is we're trying to do. And so we'll have
right.
clients come to us and say, this is what we want, give us a quote for it. But the reality is it's going to take us $10,000 just to get enough time to go in there and actually and document the requirements. And maybe it's a very technical project or something software related. And so we get to the point now where we're like, hey, we're going to just need a budget to be able to outline this thing and create the scope, because it's so big. It's not something that we're going to be able, because we're blind half the time. Like we don't really know what we don't know. And so just making sure that we don't run so fast that we're giving hard estimates on something that we didn't do our homework or we haven't spent enough time of discovery yet. So we might do an upfront discovery cost just to get us to unpack it, and then we can put together a full scope that we feel comfortable with. As far as time is concerned, we've done a pretty good job using Asana for project management, and it doesn't have specific like time tracking, but what we do is we try to break things up into sprints, and then within those sprints we may divvy up. We may, give a project to somebody and say, listen, you have 5 hours to work on this. So we start to put hours to things and let them know you got 5 hours to complete this. If you're going to go over, let us know, or if you're getting close, let us know. And then once that project is done, then it's marked off as completed, and then I can look at that and see that we've completed the milestones, and so I see that things are moving and being completed at the time frame that we've set up for that. But as far as tracking hours specifically, the time that we track the most hours if we have a retainer that's based on hours. So if we have a retainer that's based on specifically on enough hours, then we will actually track that. But I have we'll have like a project manager who does that, and so he or she will go around and make sure that the time is put in exactly how much was put in. Now, could it be 15 minutes off, a half hour off here and there? It could, but it's probably not super off. I mean, typically it's not off, and typically we're putting just a little bit more time than what even the top
Do you
is.
budget? Do you give people budgets for different pieces of projects and those kind of things internally?
Internally, we budget based on hours. So yeah, we'll say you have 20 hours to complete this.
And how do you how do you know, or how do they track that?
They put the time in and they track it themselves informally of how many days. Typically, it depends on the person, but if they're working on that sole project, they pretty much know, hey, I've worked 2.5 days on it. I got done at 1 o'clock on this day, and I've put 2.5 days on it. So they've been, they work 7 hours a day toward it, billable. So but it's really still a challenge for us. And I haven't implemented something that is really like minute by minute. I'm open to it, and I think it's necessary, especially as you grow, to get something. But I feel like I'm still figuring things out even 20 years later, because I've seen the pros and cons of both sides.
Yeah, I mean, will it ever stop being a problem?
I've seen in the past a lot of waste of measuring time. Like literally the time it takes to measure it,
Yeah, I know.
you've spent more money because you've measured it, and it didn't really get you any further.
Well, we also have to acknowledge, and this is more my area of passion, is we have to acknowledge different personalities too. It's like you're asking somebody who might be very, very, perfectionistic and type A, who has no problem measuring time and who is focused on a task and who goes in and schedules out their day minute by minute to begin with. But then you have people like myself who is very, maybe right brain and left brain too, but is also creative and, big thinker. And, we're going from project to project to conversation to creative idea. Oh, this is a great idea. Let me spend some time writing this down and documenting it too. Let me catch a conversation in the hall, or let's go strategize something over lunch. And so to be able to pin all that stuff down, it can become burdensome, but it can also become inaccurate, and then you're left with where am I really being productive?
Yeah. And what we found is that there's time tracking is good for certain type of employees. Like if you're a designer, you're behind your computer all day long and you're just working on projects, that's easy to track. But if you're a C-level, or if you're in management or sales, you're getting phone calls all the time.
Right.
You're going from one thing to another every 30 seconds. Like answering different emails.
Even project managers are like that.
Yeah. How do you keep track of that time? So there's certain people you really just in your business you may not be able to track their time, and it's just because of what they do.
Totally, I would say that with certain roles, and what I would say is usually we try and just kind of use common sense. It's for anyone who's anyone in the company, if the thing they're working on is like a piece of a project or initiative, especially for a client, it's easy enough to find the task or the place where you track time and just hit the timer. But if you're jumping around, you're doing sales stuff, that isn't 2 hours spent on a proposal or something like that, but just sales stuff, or you're doing project management stuff, which is shared across. We allocate that time as well, especially project management time. But one of the areas that you lose a ton, I think we talked about this in another episode, is proposals. So sales and the time spent before the project, like it or not, has to be accounted for, right?
Yeah.
Because you might be like, hey, you spent 10 hours selling a 10-hour project and we only spent 5 hours on it, so we're 5 hours up. No, you're 15 hours in,
I mean,
I think that math works out, right? So we started actually just tracking time spent on sales, but just in the big areas, right? So if you're putting a proposal together or something like that.
I can tell you this, that that's a super great point, is that we probably spend about 10% of our profit on each project on just getting, especially if it's a new client. If it's a brand new client, the first thing we do for them, we're spending at least 10% of our profit on the sales side of it. So we're already down 10%. So if we don't make 10% profit on the first project, we're even, if not losing money. And so that's a challenge too. Is that has to be built into and baked into your finance.
When you're thinking of your profit, I mean, an easy way to do it is just make sure you're accounting for it in the profit margin that you put into your projects, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right, it's probably 10% is probably a pretty good number. And if all you make is 10% on it, then you're break even or losing money.
Exactly.
So you really need to be pushing 20, 25, 30% hopefully on product.
You mentioned something early on too, which I think is really important, is developing systems. And when it comes to, for instance, estimates or proposals, is to be able to get those down into a science to some degree and say, know that quarter of my clients are going to be paid ad and SEO clients, for instance, or whatever your agency sells. Do you have some sort of template, a format, a formula that that you can get proposals turned around in X amount of time? Because this was a big problem for me for many years. Was oh my gosh, I got to sit down and write a proposal. I got to start from scratch. I got to write this thing out. They want all these things. Until I started realizing, okay, I'm going to start creating modules, and I'm going to save these in swipe files. There are certain things that are going to be the same on every proposal. And if a client wants, SEO or SEM or whatever it might be that we're doing, or website build, you can get this down to where, this is not necessarily a template, but these items are going to be the same in everything, right? Yeah. So there's so where I can pull out that proposal and cut down hours and hours. And I have friends, our friend Mike in his agency, they've got their proposal system down, really, really quick, and they can turn around proposals in 24 hours, which is, sounds amazing to me.
It must be based on the same basic building blocks, which is what I would say, is what we work towards. Is I believe that it needs to be okay. I think service businesses need to look at their products the same way physical product businesses do, even though it's different. I do think if you're going to be if you're going to have profitability, you're going to be healthy, and you're going to be able to have that predictably and scalably, then I think you need to work on, productizing your offerings. And to doing that, I think you have to, for us, what we've been trying to do is create basic building blocks of projects so that maybe they're the same building blocks that are going in, and we have the same systems and processes that kind of produce things, but obviously the end result is different for everybody. And so that's kind of our goal, so that we know without having to think from the ground up, we've never done this before, what's this going to take? Or we've never done it this way. We try and again, we've talked about this before, like we try and keep improving the formula, which is what our product is, which is what I believe most agencies' products are. Keep improving your formula for success in this area. And I think if you do it differently for everybody, you're never improving that, or you're never building on that. And so our goal is always to try and, if we're doing this thing, what's our formula for that? How do we improve that? And then also, how do if the more and more we know that like the back of our hand, then the easier it is to put together proposals for it, to estimate for it. So that's the goal. That's kind of like the journey that we've been on, and continuing on. Since that episode that we recorded on rethinking the model of advertising and media buying, all that kind of stuff, we've been rewriting that, because I think that's actually something we're working on right now, just based on that episode. And so,
that trickles down to not just proposals, but everything you do that for instance, the sales and the pitch process is, I have this client, we know they're interested in this. Before I get to proposal, I've got to give them capabilities, I got to give them, case studies, having all that stuff ready, and having, it might be 25 different sales pitches and 10 different types of proposals that you've built over time to be able to pull those modules and put them together, rather than starting from scratch every time and trying to go back and like, oh, what did I write last time, and is that the same or not? And you don't want to get it too boilerplate. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is get efficient, because this plays into profitability.
Yeah, we do that a little bit with our proposals. We're always looking at. We kind of have templates. We definitely have a lot of templates and language and stuff that we pull from and build our proposals a little quicker. But we don't have like a really turnkey, like where you can just click, and all of a sudden, boom, it builds itself based on what they're asking, what kind of work you're doing. But those are some things that I would like to see more of. I'd like to see us be able to. Part of it for me is not just being able to do a template, but actually looking at our offerings and saying, how can we, like you said, make a product out of each of our offerings so that it is a product on its own that can that we can have an estimate very fast, because we're kind of replicating the same thing over. This is how we work, and educating our clients. This is how we work. This is the product you're buying. It includes this, and this.
So I got a question for you. What of all your services, or all the services, Brad, Bob, that you guys have done over the years, Brad, even in your history, what are the more profitable products and services to sell, and the ones that traditionally are the ones that tend to lose money or be lower profitability or harder to maintain or manage?
Yeah. I would say the technology side is the one that's always scary. So anytime you're building technology, you just kind of don't know what to expect, especially if it's something new that you haven't done over and over again. Programmers take longer. Software developers take longer than they think. There's just more room there for that, and I think the nuances. There's so many different nuances that I think the scope of work really has to be outlined well, because I think that a client can get confused, because you do go into areas where you might not be working with an IT person. Maybe you're working with somebody in a marketing department that just isn't a technologist, right? So they don't understand the depths of what we're even presenting. So they may have a different something in mind that's different. So just making sure you're on the same board with same plane with that. And then there's other ones that I feel like, there's jobs that we've done over and over again that, this is face like building an e-blast or something, or something that's more of a smaller project that you've done 1,000 times. Those are easier, what they're going to take.
We're managing social media. That could be profitable. Just flat rate. Here's what it is per month. Exactly. I've got a writer. He knocks it out of the park every time. Someone posts it. Someone responds to. Usually that's pretty straightforward, and it could be profitable. And then the old standby is paid media. You know exactly what that is and what you're being paid for it, whether it's a percentage or a flat rate, or we've talked about this some. But those are the things I think that are not only scalable, but they're also profitable. If you manage them correctly. But yeah, I agree with Brad. The where you get into the weeds and you get upside down with the scope creep is anything that has a subjective element to it.
Right.
So website build, any type of technology that's functional that. Your client is, this is what I want, this is I want it to look like, this is how I want it to function. Those type conversations are, subject to scope creep, because you've got let's face it, it's subjectivity. You're not placing an ad and then looking at the result. You're not posting on social media and seeing how people respond. You're actually asking the client to say, do you like this? This is what you ask for. Does it do what you want it to do?
One of the projects that I think are the hardest is when you're relying on the client for content. Like, for instance, subject matter experts, they have to pour into it. Different divisions, they have to look at things and give you information. So when you're dealing with larger projects, like a large website that's going to take you 3 to 6 months, or if you're doing a big print piece like a catalog or an annual report, not that we do very many print pieces these days, but there's so much content that you're relying on the client to deliver. And that's the challenge because it's like just getting that content is a struggle sometimes.
I've found that when we found that we've tried to manage expectations as much as possible and really communicate that, and also just figure out ways to try and continually make it easier. But it continues to be a challenge, which is getting having to help and maybe even wait on clients to create their content, or at least the pieces that they only can do, right? Sometimes you can kind of help in certain areas, but ultimately, at the end of the day, there are certain areas of a project, especially technology projects, that rely on them, right? And they have to have approvals, and they have to feed into, and that can definitely be a big time delay.
What I would say is if you're ever quoting a job for a client and they tell you, don't worry about the content, we're going to provide you all of it. Don't listen to them. They're not telling you the truth. The reality is you will have to pull and you'll have to kick and scream for it, and then you will have to take it and you will have to actually rewrite it and you will have to recreate it because it's not given in a way in the format or the way that you would even need it.
Ken, one thing you guys do really well, this made me think of it, Bob, your partner, I've worked with him some on some website builds, and he's a real stickler, and rightfully so. It speaks to this, what you just said, Brad, is you guys will not start a project until you have all the content in hand. You will not start it. And you will fight with the client to say, hey, we really don't want to start because this affects the design. So until we have all the content, and I'm not sure if it's a rule of thumb.
No. I would say maybe content. I know there are certain things. It's not all content, but there are certain things, especially certain projects have other dependencies, like, they may be working on a name or something like that. And when where we can see that it would delay, the timeline, then we'll do our best to bring it up and say, we can't begin anything until you figure this out, because we know that if we do, you may say it's going to take a week, but it's probably going to take 3, on what you're doing.
I think it's a really good policy, and figure out how to
Content's a hard one, too, because, it's maybe not realistic for everyone to have all their content done up front, so we don't really, hold them on that, but we do try and say, hey, look, you've got this amount of time, and we're always trying to improve this. I think recently we've tried to estimate as best as possible, hey, you got this amount of time to do your stuff, so you should be doing it in this time. These 2-3 weeks or whatever up here, because we're going to need it on this date. And if we don't get it on that date, it's going to delay everything. And then obviously there are costs attached to delays as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I think it's a good policy. Getting back to tools, I've been working on a project with an agency lately, and they use a tool called Accelo, ACCELO. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty sophisticated project time team software. And this is it's a medium-sized agency, maybe 35 team members. But it seems to work really pretty well. I think there's a lot of options out there for things like that. But you're even talking about, like you said, like physical hand things that are out there now, hand cubes of turning and things like that.
Yeah, the challenge is once you get with a software package and you start relying on it and your whole team gets on it, you can't really get off of it. It's like Hotel California. You check in, you can't check out. And that's hard with software because you start relying on it and you get so, there's so much.
It's so painful to move. We've done it a couple times. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever seen or worked in an environment where, I'm not sure, you've probably seen these, Brad, where you have a team member and once they come on the team, their computer is automatically tied into some sort of system, so it's almost like a big brother. You actually can track and see at any time. Screen captures randomly throughout the day. Have you ever seen stuff like that?
I know there's software that'll do that, but
I don't know. I think the Chinese have something.
No, I mean I've seen that.
I think I see that happening right now to me.
I've seen that several times in bigger companies where they're actually trying to track.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In the name of tracking time. They even have this on Upwork. I've seen it where you sign on and the client can get a screen capture at any given time of when they're working on on your project. which is interesting. I don't know how I feel about that, but I was just curious if either of you guys have seen that.
'Cause at the end of the day, like, it's funny though, because we talk about all this stuff, and at the end of the day, a piece of software is probably not going to substitute character.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was actually talking with someone on our team last week, and this person has really good character and is the least of what I would be concerned about, and she was talking about how the time track, because now we're fully remote, obviously, and she feels an enhanced burden or responsibility to make sure that her time's tracked accurately because we can't see what she's doing, that kind of stuff. And I said, like, I think in my opinion, if you weren't doing your work or if you weren't fully committed or whatever, like, we'd be able to see that in other places, right? It wouldn't be the time logs that we'd have to find that in. Like, that would be, so it wouldn't be your first indicator for most people. And I think for most people, you can kind of tell, A, their character, and B, like, are they engaged, just if you're talking to someone versus having to hopefully get screen caps of their screen.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're at the size that one of our employees, they wouldn't be able to not, we would see if they're not actually producing
Right.
what they should be for the amount of time they have. So again, I hate the big brother. I don't want to ever be a big brother. I don't like I don't like employees feeling like they're being watched all the
Right.
time. I just like a little bit more freedom because I think it gives them flexibility. But again, if there was an issue, we could see it. And, I've had that issues in the past. I've had to let people go because of it in the past because they just literally were trying to avoid work. You could tell. I mean, but it wasn't just me seeing it was everyone else as well. People that want to work hard, they don't want to work with people who are making their life harder. and
People
not
will
pick
call, even if they don't want to, people will call out other people because they want to. Good people want to work with good people that are running hard.
Yeah, there's always a saying that A players want to work with A players, and as soon as an A player gets set up with a C player, it's not as engaged and doesn't really care as much. They don't want to work with them. They just, because they're dragging them.
That's a good point.
And
I mean, I would even say this, like, time tracking and all that kind of stuff. I think, again, I don't think it's a substitute for managing an employee's responsibility. Maybe it's a good check, but I think that in other ways. But I think really where it helps is obviously in profitability, but more it's, people don't, in my experience, intentionally, unless they just need to leave, but they don't intentionally not work on the right things. But I think unintentionally, there will be just, if you're not given a time frame, a lot of people will just spend too much time on something.
Yeah.
And so it gives a bit of a tool for feedback in that way. So we know, hey, it's good to have a budget on something, right? Like, if you I know any designer or developer, any creative person, if you're just like, hey, go make this thing, like, they could spend 2 months doing that. Or
sometimes
you got to say, make this thing in 2 hours or 5 hours, whatever.
Sometimes you have to say, this is good enough. You need to stop, which is really hard sometimes.
And the time budget helps that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the challenges I think that everybody has in creative is really using tools so that when you give a project to somebody and you give the vision to them, that they really understand what they're there to do. Because again, if they're not clear, they may go down a road and it's not even close to the objective or some way, how. So, we do all different things, and I've done all different things from writing really strong creative briefs to really having like brand outlines to the point where if somebody came in that has never worked on a project, they would understand the brand guardrails for a company, kind of know where to go, where not to go, especially in the creative area, which is more subjective. And so I think just really expressing the project and making sure it's very clear and having strong clarity on what they're there to do and the amount of time can save a lot. And that's really where another place where, you have someone spend 6 hours and then all of a sudden you're like, well, you're not on track. Like, that's, you don't want to do that.
Quick check-ins on that kind of stuff is important.
I always say show early and often.
Yeah.
So, and it's this idea that have your people show their stuff to you, present their stuff to you early and often, so that if they do go off on a different road that you don't want them to go, you can steer them back and on the right track. So
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. I was going to add this last thing before we leave. Like, I know I was asking about what services are most profitable, right? In your guys' opinion, because I think that I've just talked to so many agency owners, and they'll tell me the areas that aren't profitable, and it's just kind of surprising. Like, honestly, a lot of people, technology is not assumed to be very profitable, and that makes sense because there's a lot of cost involved in it, and then there's almost an ignorance a lot of times on the client side, or naivety maybe is a better word, because they're not technologists, right? And that isn't everything's assumed to be a little bit easier than it might be. But I know another area that we found, and the more I talk to people about it, it seems to have a higher cost than expected, yet everyone seems to do it, is actually in like media buying, like for specific platforms. So let's say like Facebook ad management or some of these other ones. I talk more and more to people, and for a percentage, we talked about the percentage model, right? And it's broken and all that kind of stuff. But for most people, the percentage that they're charging and really where it comes down to them losing money is in the creative. So they'll include every piece of creative in it.
For the percentage.
And video and all this stuff. And then it's refreshed like 3 times a week or something like that if it's done right. And actually ends up being not very profitable. And on top of that, then the price is being driven down just by there's sort of a price competition in the marketplace right now.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've seen as being honestly not very profitable unless it's attached to a more holistic engagement.
Yeah, I have gotten to the point where both with myself and with other clients, if media buying's to be done correctly, and you're really attaching it to results, ROI, then you can then enter into a relationship with a client where sometimes, depending on their spend, right, that the management can be more than the monthly spend. Because if the result is strong, then the client shouldn't mind. But if all you're doing is placing it and getting impressions and getting eyeballs and really not doing at a high quality of what they would engage you for to begin with, then you can really lose money on it. But I think hopefully people are starting to see if you're really an expert in something, your media spend might be $2,000 a month, but it might cost $3,000 a month to manage it and do that creative. And as an agency, you've got to be willing to get your client there to really understand the value of what you're doing.
Yeah, we with some of our clients, we always look at their full scope of work. Like if we look at a year-long scope of work for a client, there might be projects that we do for less just because they they don't have the budget to do at that level, but other things they do. And so we are always looking at like how can we make this work for some of our clients. We might do 150 projects a year for them. And so how do we make this work overall? So a lot of times I'm managing budgets and looking at profitability overall for clients and not specifically on just one little project that comes and goes in a couple of days. Because I always tell my employees I'm here to win the war, not just win each battle. And the war to me is in the end result of the total is what's really more important for me. And is my client happy? Have I been a good partner with them? And what's we talk a lot about lifetime value, and we do have lifetime values of clients and customers, and we need to know, hey, if I have a customer for the 5 years and I've served them well, that's 5 years of business of not having to go out and get new business, which costs a lot of money and profit.
That's great.
So just the way that you look at your business, I think everyone has to look at it in the way that makes sense for them. And again, if implementing tools that it becomes laborsome, it becomes hard for everyone, then I think you got to kind of ask the question: could I do without that, or what value is that really adding?
And I think when you're talking about profitability, you just touched on something that I think is the big secret to success, to profitability for any agency, is to be able to look at each project and client holistically, and to have the right team together, so that when someone does come to you and says, I want this website built, you're like, oh, great. This is what we're going to make on it. Let's go get a few more clients like this. It's less of that, and it's more of, how can we build this website and serve this client and look ahead and say, if we build it this way, then this will allow your digital marketing to work better. This will allow your social media working, and you have those conversations so that you can go deep with that client and say, with this client, our goal is not just to build a website, but to have them for the next 3 years where we're going to do all of their marketing, all of their strategy, ultimately. And I think that's the secret. That's the secret, is if you can get to a point where you are looking holistically, you have the team that can help you service all those things, it's much cheaper and profitable to have one client for 3 years than have 3 clients each year.
Yeah.
Much better.
Totally.
Well, guys, this is great nuggets of wisdom.
Digging through all the boring stuff that makes us money.
Yeah. I'd be happy to hear from anyone out there too, if they have any good tips on time tracking, or any software, or any new software that's coming up that you found was helpful.
Go to the Facebook group, Agency Exposed Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. And if anybody's interested in being a guest, we're always looking for new people to be on. So definitely do that. And what's really, really important for us is please go and like and review if you like this podcast. We need to get some more on there as we continue to grow and have more listeners.
Yeah.
Great, guys.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.